Okay, so can you tell me, you started to say about Jobs that he was an interesting character?
Well, he was a very focused individual, which meant that if there was something that he was after in particular, you never wanted to get between him and it. You'd wind up with cat's paw on your forehead. He had some fascinating ideas, but he was very single-minded.
You first worked with him at Atari, right?
Yes, 2 years. And we were pretty chummy for that 2 years.
And did you consider it a combination of a friendship and also that he looked to you as a mentor?
To some degree, because I was in my 40s and those kids were in their 20s.
Yeah.
But the relationship was like having a tiger by the tail.
Yeah.
Okay. And if I had stayed with Apple, I probably would have wound up the richest man in the cemetery.
You mentioned that the evening that you three executed the partnership,
right?
You said that you first resolved a modest dispute between the two Steves.
That's correct.
What can you elaborate on what that dispute was? Or?
The dispute was simple. Wozniak, as I said, was a very whimsical character. And he was also very proprietary, parental, I should say, about his circuit designs. And he wanted to reserve the right to use those circuits elsewhere.
Okay.
And Jobs was telling you can't do this.
Right.
Well, apparently Jobs was not articulate enough to get Woz to understand. And seeing me as something of a mentor, he asked me if I would help him get the idea and the understanding across to Wozniak.
Wow.
Which I did.
Yeah.
Woz was a reasonable fellow. It was a matter of how it was presented, that's all. And in that evening's conversation, within an hour, he concurred that it was proprietary and it was the core of the corporate assets or the company assets.
And you sat down and typed up 3 copies.
At that moment in time, I sat down and wrote out 3 contracts.
Typed up, right?
Typed out 3 contracts.
And then everybody signed the 3? And
all of us signed each of the 3. Woz was apparently quite impressed that I could write a contract in legalese.
What about, I'm assuming there was no significance to the fact that it was April Fool's Day.
None whatsoever.
Okay.
You have to understand that while this was a turning point in history, a real turning point in history, at the time, you don't realize that.
Of course.
All right, it's just another day, another series of events, and we were having fun.
Right.
That's what it amounted to.
Right.
Even at 40, I was able to have fun.
Yeah. Oh, and then for Atari, you were senior engineer, is that what it was?
I was the chief draftsman and product development engineer. I was the guy who designed the cabinets for the games.
Right.
And they also had me, engaged me as a international field service engineer.
Do you remember meeting Jobs at Atari then?
Oh, of course.
And so what was that?
A lot of time with him at Atari.
But I mean, when you first met him, do you have a recollection of your first impression?
Not my first impression, no.
Yeah.
Because first of all, he was not a direct employee. He was a consultant.
Gotcha.
And they brought him in to do various things, like, for instance, that situation in Europe where they had bought a huge warehouse full of circuit boards.
Okay.
And a lot of them didn't work. And it was quite a problem. And Bushnell had sent a technician out to service these boards.
Right.
And this technician, not to put too fine a point on it, was something of a klutz.
Okay. Yeah.
But he had to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So he engaged Jobs and said, go over there and service these boards.
Really?
It's desperate. We've got to get these boards serviced. first-class airfare. I'll set you up in a hotel.
Yeah.
Have a grand time for yourself, and a good rate of pay. And Jobs said on one condition,
Yeah.
that you give me a one-way ticket, and I'll take the difference in cash, because it was after that he made his excursion to India.
Right. Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
And being International Field Service Engineer, I was getting these rather nasty phone calls, which as soon as Jobs got there, the tone of the phone calls changed dramatically.
Really?
In record time, he was just spitting those things out like popcorn,
Fixing them.
getting them all serviced and working.
He figured out how to do it.
Oh, he was a highly skilled technician.
Wow. Incredible.
He did the job. But I will let you in on another little anecdote. In terms of Steve Jobs and his personality, he was a fun guy to know, an interesting guy to know, but he had two interesting aspects. One, he was absolutely well-informed on the subjects in which he was interested. The subjects he was not interested in, he had absolutely no interest and no knowledge. I almost lost my upper set one day when, in the course of conversation, I discovered he didn't know that aluminum was a conductor. Not his realm of interest. The other aspect of it was that, being as dynamic as he was, if you had chose between Steve Jobs and an ice cube, you would nuzzle up to the ice cube for warmth. Okay? Now, I do not say that in a derogatory sense. I'm simply describing it as his nature.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's what it took to do what he did.
Yeah. Can you just talk about, I guess, just briefly describe the original partnership agreement, how you hung on to it for a long time. I guess you probably didn't think anything about it, that you were. It was in a file, right?
It was in a file for years and years and
Yeah.
years. And I came across an ad from somebody who dealt in autographs.
Yeah.
And by that time, Apple had risen to some prominence.
Yeah.
And I'm just a humble employee. I was chief engineer at a company in California called Thor Electronics, position I held for 16 years until I retired. Modest income, but you could always use a few more shekels. And here's this ad for somebody who buys autographs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I got this thing sitting in the files collecting dust. Why not? So I got in touch with the guy, and he was interested, and we settled on $500. And I sold my copy of the Apple computer contract to this guy for $500. That was the same contract which about a year ago sold at auction for $1.3 million. Story of my life.
And that was the contract from April 1st.
1976.
Yeah. But you did tell me that there was one aspect of it about how at least you have the feeling now that you...
Yes, that is true. At least I can say I created something in my lifetime that sold for $1 million.
When you all did the original partnership agreement,
Yes.
how was it determined that you would get 10%?
Well, that was totally Steve Jobs' spur of the moment idea. He was so impressed with my skills at diplomacy, working with Steve Wozniak, that he instantly said, okay, we're going to form a company, and Jobs and Wozniak would each have 45%, and I would get 10% as the tiebreaker, because Jobs felt that if any serious dispute came along, he could rely on me to come down on the side of reason and practicality.
Yeah.
Diplomacy. You know what a diplomat is, don't you?
No.
A diplomat is somebody who can tell you to go to hell in a way that makes you look forward to the trip.